Hey everybody, welcome back to Sounds Like a Drum, Cadence Independent Media Production. Today, we are talking about ear training, what it means, intervals, pitches, stuff like that, because we talk about it a lot here and we haven't really gotten super far into what all this stuff really means. Now, some recent videos we've talked about intervals between the toms, and lots of videos we've talked about intervals between maybe the top and bottom head of the drum, different things like that. And since we got into talking about terminology and things like that recently, we felt like it was important to kind of jump into like an ear training 101 specifically for drummers to talk about what these things are, what we're listening for, and what the point of this knowledge actually is. Extra special thanks to DistroKid for sponsoring today's episode. If you're not familiar with DistroKid, they are a channel basically for getting your music to as many people as humanly possible on digital platforms, iHeartRadio, Spotify, basically everything. And they've lately introduced getting it into Instagram and Facebook as well, and even getting the lyrics in real time as the song goes by on the screen if you want to do that, which I think is pretty cool. DistroKid gets your music onto virtually every platform that I can think of. TikTok, everything. It's also a way for your royalties to get funneled very quickly and easily to you. It takes all of the legwork out of it. A lot of us are home right now. We're making a lot of music. We're trying to figure out how to get that music to the people that want to hear it. And this is an incredible service that can basically simplify that entire process for a nominal subscription fee. Whether you're releasing one album this year or 90 albums this year, this is basically a one-stop shop with many levels inside of it to make sure that you can get everything you're making to the people that want to hear it. The kind folks at DistroKid have been awesome to us and are now offering a discount code for our viewers. If you go to distrokid.com/VIP/soundslikeadrum, you can get 7% off of the service. First and foremost, because we do myth busting here, we would like to bust the myth that people, maybe a lot of people, are tone deaf. People throw that word around a lot. A lot of friends of mine and musicians I play with and stuff consider themselves to be quote unquote tone deaf. And it is my understanding that to literally be actually tone deaf is a super duper rare thing. And what's more likely is that some of us have either inadvertently or intentionally trained our ears more than other people over time. For me, some of you who may have seen my Instagram know that I also play guitar and bass. Those were actually my first instruments. So I was introduced to thinking in terms of musical notes and intervals between those notes when I was a kid, which makes some of these things a little more intuitive for me personally because that was already stuff that was kind of in my head. If you go to college for music or if you take private lessons, lots of times teachers will impress upon you the importance of knowing these things to some degree. There's not a lot that you need to know, but the first thing you need to know is that anyone can do this. Anyone can understand these things and hear them and reproduce them, and each one of us will need to do a certain amount of work specific to the individual to get comfortable with this information. Now today we're going to start off in the sort of a three-part series here in the video today with a single-headed drum and just talking about pitch differentiation between single lugs. And as we go through that, we'll move on to between two heads on a single drum and eventually get to two different drums and how they're interacting with each other. Now let's touch on some important words that we're going to use when we're talking about this stuff. First of all, timbre and tone. Timbre is the quality of a tone separate from pitch and intensity. It's the quality that makes an oboe sound different than a French horn when they're playing the same note. The note is the same, but the character of the note is different, and that helps you identify these two different instruments that may be playing literally the same note in the same octave. It's the same thing that makes an acrolite sound different than a bell brass tuned to the same pitches, or a 24-inch bass drum and an 18 tuned to the same pitches. There's just a quality of the sound that can't be produced when you have one and you're trying to get the other. Now, the next term that gets kind of bandied about when we're talking about drums and tuning is overtones. What an overtone literally is a component of a note. When you're hearing a note, you're hearing a fundamental and you're hearing a harmonic series, which is sort of like extra little building blocks that are higher in pitch and that help comprise the complete sound that you hear when you're hearing a musical note. If you happen to be a person that horses around with synthesizers ever, a sine wave is basically a pitch that has no overtones. It's fundamental only. And that's one of the things that makes a synthesizer what it is that you start off with that and then you can add things on top of it to build the timbre that you want. It's worth also noting in this moment about overtones that we spend a lot of time trying to control or in our minds suppress overtones by muffling to alter the sound of the drum and get it more like how we want it to sound. And depending on who you talk to, you could say that we're muffling overtones, or you could say that we're modifying the sound of the drum to accentuate the fundamental because that's the tone that we're after. That was actually brought up in an interview a long time ago with Gary Gauger, who invented the rims mount, where he realized that there was a point at which people weren't trying to get rid of the overtones, they just wanted more fundamental, they wanted more low end. The overtones are part of the complete sound of the drum, so if you suppress them, you're losing volume and you're losing projection because you're taking away part of the sound of the drum. It's not wrong to do at all, but let's make sure that we talk about it in terms of what it really is. Alongside the overtones, we have to talk about the fundamental, which is the primary low, generally lowest, although sometimes there are subfrequencies, tone in an instrument, a drum, a piano, whatever it is. It's the main thing underneath, and then harmonics and overtones are kind of above that. All right, now that we got all of that stuff out of the way, we're going to do most of this demonstration on the 12-inch rack tom that we have here because it's conveniently located, it's easy to get it off the stand, and I find it easier to manipulate a sort of medium-sized tom than to try to do this on a snare drum or a really large tom where maybe the tuning range isn't quite as large and we can really get into what this drum is going to do. So first things first, we need to make sure that we're only really interacting with the batter head on this drum because I don't want the reso head to be interfering with its own resonance when we're discussing the behavior of the batter head. So we're going to remove this from the bass drum mount and we're going to set it on our conveniently located reflex pad so that we can mute the reso head and only really hear what's going on with the batter. All right, we've got the drum up on the practice pad, on the snare now. It is muffling the bottom head effectively and really leaving us just with the overtones on the top head, which you can hear really clearly if we strike the drum at the edge with a stick or a finger or anything like that. But if you hit it in the center and try to get a fundamental, it's really not coming out at all because the resonant head is not resonating, so it's stopping the batter from resonating too. Now this drum is essentially in tune. It's fairly balanced because we were using it for some other things. And I want to now take it out of tune. I'm going to raise a couple of lugs and lower a couple of lugs so we can hopefully get an idea of what it sounds like when things are out of balance. So at this point we've got this lug right here lower than the rest of them. And if you very gently touch the head in the center to further quell the possibility of hearing the fundamental, super duper gentle, we don't want to be pressing into it, and go around, you can hear that there's a difference between these two. Basically, understanding with your ears higher and lower with pitches is one of the first steps toward ear training in terms of being able to tune the drums and being able to also replicate what you've done when you find something that you're happy with. Because sometimes what you're happy with is a drum that's not quite in tune with itself too, you never know. Intervals between lugs, not super important, not really a thing we need to get that far into because this is much more of a subtle thing in following your ear once the drum is in tune with itself. But the intervals between the heads and also between your toms, if you have more than one tom, is much more influential to the actual sound of the kit and the way it projects and the way that it records. All right, part 2, batter versus reso. Now, this is a alarmingly contentious topic online. Especially with toms in terms of intervals. When people talk about snares, they are usually talking about tension in a general way, like tabletop tight or tune the snare side as high as you can, that kind of thing. But with a tom, you'll hear people say things like a minor second between the heads or a major third or, gosh, Manu, maybe a fifth, something really extreme. These intervals are something that if you maybe only have come up playing drums, don't have a super clear grasp on what they're even talking about, like a third of what does that mean? What we're talking about is the notes on a keyboard, basically. And we're talking about a distance from the pitch that this head's making to the pitch that the other head is making, and the end result, which is a third pitch coming out of your drum. And they work together, or they'll work against each other, depending on if these pitches are consonant and also work with the size of the drum that you're using, the bearing edges, everything kind of comes into play. So what we're going to do is we're going to run through a couple of basically relationships between the batter head and the reso head on this drum and bring over some samples that are just pitched so you can hear the distance we're talking about between these two notes. All right, now pitch intervals and pitches in general on drums are not an exact science because you're also hitting it, so it's going to be shifting around a little bit even after you've tuned it up as nicely as you can. But what we got here now is an approximate half step, E to F, between the batter and the reso head. So the reso is half step, or one white key with no black key in between, higher than the batter. And what that would sound like on a piano is like this. Now, for one more example, we're going to do a minor third now. So this is going to be an E and then a G on the bottom instead of an F. And on a piano, it sounds like this. Now, these intervals, the reason that we even talk about them is because it's in furtherance of getting a sound out of the drum that we want to have. So the exact notes are not the thing that's crucial about this. What's crucial about it is understanding that these intervals between the two heads matter and they influence the sound. If you've seen any of our recent videos with the Welch tuning system, that's a system where they're both the same all the time, and that's a totally amazing sound. It's one of many sounds. Some people like to really jack up the bottom, especially I find with solid shell drums or block construction. A super tight bottom head manages to activate the stiff shell a little bit better. Anything in between, it's all on the table. But knowing what we're doing will allow us to understand how to get it again, and maybe also teach us all of the different sounds that a drum will do that we own, rather than just finding a good one and leaving it at that. One of the main things that changes about the drum when you change the interval between the two heads is the timbre thing from before, because you're influencing these two heads and their overtones and the way that all that stuff is interacting, because they're pushing back against each other. You're moving one that's moving the other that's moving the first one again. So when you hear someone who has a really identifiable drum sound, a lot of what we're talking about is that timbre thing. It's not the note that the drum is, but it's how the thing is interacting. The stick they choose also influences that. Everything. The same with cymbals, anything that you're hitting, really. So this is another thing to put in your toolkit to get a sound that is ultimately going to be your own, because you're going to make the sound with the drum and then you're going to make it when you hit it. Secondarily, it's going to be super unique. All right, now part 3, intervals between drums. We've done that a lot here. We're going to just do one demonstration of that, but get this back on the bass drum now. All right, we have the 12 tuned to an A, roughly, and the 16 tuned to an E, roughly. So that means that the intervallic distance from the floor tom up to the rack is a perfect fourth, E to A. And what this sounds like is this. Now, a lot of us that think in terms of intervals like this use mnemonic devices or some kind of idea to help us remember what these sound like. And the most common one that I've heard for this interval is the first notes of Here Comes the Bride. And here's what it sounds like on a piano. Now, I know that a lot of this can be super overwhelming, and hopefully this doesn't scare you off from looking into this kind of thing, but at the end of the day, just like everything else that we kind of work on here and do here, we're looking for opportunities to explore sound in a way that's not scary and that's not, I don't know, like, you want to be able to remember what you did. You want to feel like you have control over the sound that you're making. And it definitely was daunting when I was first learning how to do this. And it has since become a thing that I use all the time, whether it's just simply like tuning up the kit at the gig that I'm going to play that night on the back line, or teching a session for myself or teching a session for somebody else. And when you get into intervals between toms, you can get more exciting options around your kit when you're doing fills around the toms. When you're getting into intervals between the two heads on the drum, you can really adjust the timbre and the sustain and the tone, how much fundamental, how much overtone, and then muffling on top of that. You know, the possibilities are endless. And it is worth noting that the intervals that sound beautiful on a small tom are probably not the same as are going to sound great on a big floor tom, or a snare, or a bass drum. So you get to do this with all the different size drums that you have, to really find out everything that they can do, and even write it down and keep track. Like if it turns out that you really like a minor third between the two heads on your rack tom, you can just write that down or remember it, and then when you change the heads, put it back there again, and chances are it'll make the same sound if it's the same kind of heads and the same drum. Now, there's lots of ways to work on this kind of thing that you can approach the same as you would to ostinato practice or rudiments or anything else. And the very simplest one is pitch matching with your voice. Now, I'm not a singer at all, but if you study music, if you go really deep, you end up having to sing at least a little bit just to train your ears. And the thing that I found most useful to do is to get comfortable matching a pitch, just like maybe get one of the free keyboard apps for your phone or something like that. Play a pitch, sing the same pitch. Then the next step is play that pitch and sing an interval above it that you planned, like you're going to sing a major second, or if you're playing an E, you're going to sing an A, like a fourth. And then sing above, and then move to that note and see how close you were. And it's exactly the same as practicing with a metronome or anything else that you do, where it's going to start off terrible, and then over time it's going to get much, much better. I've seen people with ears so amazing that they can improvise compositions on stage together because they know that the guy next to him is playing a G minor chord with a major 7 in it or whatever, like instantly, and it's incredible. And the sky's the limit with this stuff. But for us, for the lowly drummers, this is just about us knowing our instrument and realizing that there is a tonal and a melodic quality to these instruments. It's not the same as a guitar, but that doesn't mean that we don't need to know this stuff, or that at least it won't help us to know it. Now, with the drum set, taking the time to just grab one of your drums, totally detune one of the heads, and practice bringing it all up slowly with tiny increments so that all of the lugs are the same pitch. This is the same thing as that interval exercise I was just describing with the phone app or an actual piano if you happen to have one. It's a matter of just doing it repeatedly. It doesn't take that long. It's just a matter of doing it a lot, because repetition breeds the knowledge, and it's the same as muscle memory, doing paradiddles all day or anything else. The more you do it and the more consistently you do it, it's going to get easier. And pretty soon, the idea that tuning the drums or changing the heads is a hassle kind of goes out the window. I honestly don't even notice it anymore. I do it and it's done, and then you can play. And it's one less thing to get in the way of you making the music you want to make and getting better at the instrument. Also important to mention, if you are an individual who uses some kind of tuning device or bot to get your sounds, there's 100% nothing wrong with that at all. I personally think that understanding the interval relationships and things is fascinating to me from a musical perspective rather than using numbers or tension measurements, because it brings us back to the idea that these are a musical instrument for me rather than just purely a thing that we're hitting. Knowing what those tensions mean and how they relate to pitches is just another level of understanding of the sound you're making and how those pitches are interacting with each other. All right, that about wraps it up. Thanks so much for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and hit the notification bell below so you find out about our new videos coming out. We are deep in season 3 already and super excited about it. And we are extremely grateful to the patrons on our Patreon for helping make this season possible. This is the Patreon season, and we're super excited about it. If you're interested in being involved in ideas for content, extra footage, behind the scenes stuff, playing demos, all kinds of things like that, follow the link below, check out the levels, see what we're up to over there. There's a lot of fun things going on, and we have some Patreon funded series is coming up. If you've been paying attention, there's going to be some exciting things that we've been thinking about for a long time. And extra special thanks to DistroKid for funding this particular episode. We really appreciate it. If you want to get your music out in front of as many people as humanly possible for a surprisingly small amount of money, go check them out. They're really the best, and